Now, it is my privilege to turn it over to our first speaker, Dr. John Newton. Dr. Newton has been the chief economist at the America Farm Bureau since 2018. As chief economist, Dr. Newton manages Farm Bureau's 5-person economics department. In this role, he is responsible for their economic policy analysis. He advises Farm Bureau grassroots members, state staff, America Farm Bureau staff, and America Farm Bureau leadership on economic implications of agricultural policy issues and proposals to help advance the organization's advocacy efforts. It is my privilege to now turn it over to Dr. John Newton. Dr. Newton, take it away.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to join you guys this morning. I'm going to go through, a brief presentation with you, but if at any point you have questions, let me know. And anything that I don't cover doesn't mean we can't ask questions about that. I'm happy to share anything that Farm Bureau is working on with you on any of the issues or questions that you may have. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with everyone. And again, please let me know if you have any questions or if I don't cover certain material. It's no secret that, the last few years have been especially difficult for agriculture. We're coming out of 2014, 2013, where we saw historically high commodity prices, and commodity prices have been low now for several years. Then in 2018, we had China impose retaliatory tariffs on just about every single agricultural product that we shipped them. That resulted in a pretty steep decline in our exports to China, resulted in a pretty steep decline in our trade surplus. So I think folks were pretty optimistic coming into 2020 that things were going to get a little bit better. We had the phase 1 agreement that we negotiated. We had USMCA, we had the Japan trade agreement, we had KORUS. And when you take all of those different trade agreements, that represented more than 50% of our agricultural exports. So we found ourselves coming into this year with improved competitive position in our top agricultural markets overseas. We also knew that we were going to see our acreage bounce back. I mean, 2019 was a pretty tough year in terms of a historically late planted crop. We had poor yields across the country. So we knew that we were going to see more corn and soybean acres this year. We did see a slight decline in wheat acres to 44 million and a slight decline in cotton acres. But overall, I think we knew that not only were our acres going to come back online, but we were probably going to be dealing with somewhere, trend or above yields, most likely as well. So we knew we had a big crop on our hands. We also knew that we were going to have a lot of livestock products, dairy products on our hands as well. So I think folks were optimistic that trade would hopefully carry the load. Like I said, we knew that yields were going to improve. Yields this year for corn, 176 bushels an acre, on soybeans, nearly 51 bushels per acre. Wheat dropped down a little bit to 50 bushels an acre. So again, we've got the supplies this year on the crop side. On the livestock side, again, we were expecting record pork production, record poultry production, about a 1% increase in beef production. We know that the cattle herd is beginning to contract. There's generally what's called a 10-year cattle cycle, and we're on the downward side of that cattle cycle. Milk production was also expected to be record high. So again, with a rebound in crop production and pretty much record livestock product production, we knew that the export market was going to be key to the success for the farm economy this year. And I think folks were optimistic that we were finally starting to get back to something that resembled a normal year in terms of getting these black swan events behind us in terms of ad hoc natural disasters or trade wars. Unfortunately, that light at the end of the tunnel turned out to be a freight train. And I haven't even updated this COVID-19 chart in some time, but as everybody on the call knows, we've entered the third wave of this thing. We've got I think we have more than 45 million Americans that have had a positive COVID-19 test at some point in time. That immediately resulted in the closure of restaurants and schools and shelter in place orders. We saw a run on grocery stores. At Farm Bureau, we've been working on this issue nonstop since March 13th. The first thing we were working on was with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to make sure that our H-2A workers could continue to enter the country. We were then working with livestock facilities, make sure they had PPE equipment. Dairy farmers that were dumping milk, we went to RMA and said don't penalize them on their dairy revenue protection policies. We've just been, every issue that's popped up since March on COVID-19, we've been deeply engaged on. We've been on the phone with the Commodity Futures Trade Commission and Zoom calls with them. President Zippy Duvall has been engaged with them, been engaged with the secretary on what happened in cattle markets. So we've been very, very engaged, but the world certainly changed in mid-March, and it's been pretty disruptive to agriculture. At this point in time, I think things have certainly improved. The outlook's improved, but I'm going to highlight some of the challenges that we faced as a result of COVID-19. Aside from some of the others I mentioned, one of the most, biggest things that we saw from agriculture was food service and schools, and the sales in that capacity declined from, somewhere in the neighborhood of $63 billion in February to, $30 billion in April. So a pretty steep decline, as you can see in this blue line, in food service and drinking sales. It has rebounded. It rebounded rather quickly as states began to reopen. But as you can see, because we're still, limited capacity in dining, several cities and states across the country are now reimposing shelter in place orders. So food service sales have not really bounced back to the extent that they were before COVID-19. They kind of plateaued a little bit. Grocery store sales have obviously been a lot higher than they've ever been. This past month, they came in at 63 billion. But when you take both of those combined, we're just not simply spending the same amount of money on food that we were before COVID-19. And just to put COVID into perspective, on the left side here is the Great Recession. In terms of Americans' expenditures on food, you see slight declines. And then on the right side is COVID-19. And that just, I think, puts into perspective the magnitude of the supply chain disruption that we saw in food and agriculture. We had members, I had folks out in Idaho call that, they grow potatoes for the frozen French fry business. All of a sudden, those orders were canceled and they've got nowhere to go with those potatoes. I had folks in parts of California that were calling because they were plowing under their onions because they had nowhere to go. Folks that raised nursery crops, had greenhouses that, saw their business decline pretty significantly due to, Mother's Day just wasn't the same as it was in a pre-COVID environment. I mean, the list goes on in terms of how significantly folks were impacted due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I've been engaged with dairy folks this whole time. There were efforts at one point in time to institute a supply management system to control the milk supply in the face of COVID-19. Then there was an effort to set a minimum price for Class 1 milk. Then there was an effort to do the food box program. And that whole time we were asking the secretary to make direct payments to dairy producers. So there's been a number of issues that we've been engaged in because of the COVID-19 pandemic. On the beef and pork side, and really even the poultry side, we had meat processing plants go down. Governors were shutting them down for 2-week periods. So you had a situation where retailers were scrambling to get, meat on the shelves, but the plants were shut down and farmers had market ready animals that they needed to send to slaughter, and there just wasn't anywhere to go. So beef and pork production both fell by more than 30% in the spring. They rebounded once we were able to get personal protective equipment into the facilities, once we were able to refabricate the facilities so that workers could get back in without worrying about the COVID-19 virus. But what that did to farm prices was pretty significant. As an example, on the beef side, you had retail beef prices hit a record high. while farm prices were fairly low. The farm share of the beef dollar fell to a record low 33% this spring as farm prices fell because folks had to get rid of these livestock or try to find a hook for them, and there just wasn't a lot of hook space available. And that was the same in the pork side. It was the same in the poultry side. We're still working to get some help for contract hog and poultry producers. Hopefully, we'll be able to do that before the year end. But that's something that we continue to work with. They didn't get any assistance in the CFAP package. Commodity price volatility as a result of this was pretty significant. We euthanized, if not more than 1 million hogs because of COVID-19. We were able to get our cattle to heavier weights so that they could wait until these processing facilities opened. But you see hog prices fell dramatically. If you look at, class 3 milk, it rose towards the end of May because of the food box program. Rice, we had a short rice crop last year. So we had, institutional investors come in speculating on rice. Rice futures jumped 70% during the COVID-19 pandemic. I could pick any one of these commodities and tell you why we saw prices decline due to COVID. On the ethanol side, people weren't driving. On the soybean side, there was uncertainty on trade. On feeder cattle, it was, no hook space. On cotton, it was, no one's buying clothing. China, the processing facilities are all shut down for a period of time. On corn, since ethanol profitability was low, corn prices went down. Live cattle, again, no hook space. Class 4 milk, reflected the export and the butter environment. So a lot of volatility on commodity prices as a result of COVID-19. For dairy, one of the other big challenges that emerged, and I'll be happy to answer questions on this, was we changed the farm bill price. We changed the class 1 milk price in the farm bill to be the average of class 3 and class 4. So the old class 1 price would have been based on the higher of, and we saw cheese prices hit a record this year because of the food box program. But because we got rid of the higher of, that resulted in, class 1 milk prices that were, anywhere between $4 and $5 a hundredweight below what they would have been had we not changed the farm bill milk price. I had a dairy farmer from Florida call me and said he's lost, because of this class 1 milk price change, he's had over $300,000 in less revenue than what he would have had had we not changed the class 1 milk price formula. For you guys out there, you're in the central order, your component pricing order. The biggest impact you would have seen from this, because the spread between class 3 and class 4 was so wide, you had very, very significant negative PPDs. In the central order for October, for example, it was negative $7 PPD. So that's a $7 deduction in your milk check. Folks that were fortunate enough to be going to a cheese plant may not have seen as negative a PPD, but because these PPDs were so negative, because class 3 prices were record high, you had a significant amount of depooling occur. So people took milk and did not pool it on the federal orders. My estimate is these negative PPDs and the change in the class 1 milk price formula likely took somewhere in the neighborhood between $2 and $3 billion out of dairy farmer milk checks this year. And that's nationwide. USDA did come in because of Congress and the president in March. We had the CARES Act. So there was about $23.5 billion that was either to the office of the secretary or for CCC replenishment. So USDA used those to create 2 different ad hoc assistance programs, CFAP 1 and CFAP 2. Those programs were very significant for the dairy industry this year. I believe delivering more than $2 billion in direct payments for dairy alone. If you look just in the second support package, and this is for all commodities, not just dairy, and this is slightly before Thanksgiving. I haven't updated it for information after Thanksgiving, but we see, nearly $11 billion in CFAP support in the second package. I think the first package had about 10 to 11 billion go out as well. So, you know, close to 25 billion dollars in direct payments to producers through the CFAP program alone. About $6 billion in paycheck protection loans that were forgiven. About $4 billion in MFP payments have gone out this year. So a pretty significant amount of ad hoc support has gone out to farmers this year. Iowa, leads the country in terms of support in CFAP. You're at close to $1 billion. And that's obviously because of not only your dairy, your corn and soybeans, but also your hog operations, your poultry operations that are eligible for CFAP support. The other thing we saw this year was trade slowdown in most of our major markets for obvious reasons. Everyone's experiencing a recession due to COVID-19. The only place that really we've seen exports accelerate is China. They're dealing with African swine fever, so they need to purchase animal proteins. Their hog herd is rebounding, so they need soybeans. Their corn is in terrible shape, so they're buying a record amount of corn from the United States. Matter of fact, in October, sales to China approached nearly $5 billion, which was a record. I think it's a step in the right direction on phase one. I don't think we're going to meet the total purchase commitment, but when you take into consideration the structural changes that they've made, I think we're going to have a pretty good year on sales to China. Here on corn and soybeans, I know most of you guys, you dairy, but you probably also raise crops. We've seen export commitments be record high, and that's helped to lift prices these last few months for corn and soybeans. Not only that, but the crop has gotten smaller. I think we get the latest WASDE report from USDA today at noon, so we'll see what the update there is. It hasn't just been corn and soybeans, though. Exports to China on the livestock side have been pretty good. You can see cotton exports have been pretty good. Poultry products are record high exports to China. And on the dairy side, we're about where we were in 2017. The challenge with dairy on exports to China is most of our exports to China, we're putting in dry containers. If you want to send, cheese, butter, fluid products, it's got to be refrigerated. And most of the exports we do, we jump in on the backhaul to China, and it's more difficult to do that on the dairy side than some of our other products. As I said, we had a pretty strong October in terms of exports to China. Right now, through October, we've exported about $17.5 billion. If that pace continues, I think we'll end the year somewhere in between 25 and $30 billion in sales to China, which would be a record. It's not going to meet the phase one commitment of 33 to $36 billion, but it is going to be a record this year if sales continue on the current pace. I think the concern that some folks may have is if China starts to cancel any orders, and some of these exports may not materialize, but we'll have to keep watching that. We won't know that until much later on whether or not these shipments actually occur. Traditionally, 75% of our exports to China occur from October to March. So we'll just keep watching that data and see what materializes. Excuse me. Since August, however, as the crop has gotten smaller and the exports have been pretty strong, we've seen prices for a lot of products improve. Milk prices have improved significantly. And let me say that's all on the back of the food box program. The food box program is gone. And as a result of that, milk prices have evaporated for December and going into the first quarter next year and moving into the spring flush. So if you don't have a risk management plan in place, now's the time to get one. You still got an opportunity to sign up for dairy margin coverage. I know it didn't work that well for folks because of negative PPDs, but at 15 cents a hundredweight for your first 5 million pounds of milk, it's something. Put some sort of risk management in place. I don't think these food boxes are going to continue. I know that some people are out there asking for it, but I don't think, there's a possibility that we could see another one between now and the end of the year, but I think it's a long shot at best. So, that rally we've seen in milk prices is likely going to disappear. And I don't think it'll come back, given that milk production continues to rise by 2 or 3%. So again, I can't reiterate enough the importance of putting a risk management plan in place on dairy. Soybean prices have increased pretty significantly because of Chinese purchases. Cotton has improved as retail sales have picked back up, and China's bought a lot of cotton. Corn prices have improved. Again, the crop has gotten a lot smaller than what we thought 6 months ago. We're under 200 million bushel carryout on soybeans, about 1.7 billion bushel corn carryout. That's helped to push prices higher. So right now, USDA is showing a corn price this marketing year at $4 a bushel. That's going to be up 44 cents from last year. They've got soybeans now at $10.40 per bushel. That's the highest it's been in a number of years. There's some people out there right now talking about beans in the teens. So keep your eye on that. We've seen wheat prices jump, and we've seen cotton prices jump. Again, all of that on pretty strong exports. Bringing it, to the farm income side, yesterday or 2 days ago, USDA released updated projections on farm income for 2020. I don't think it's any secret that, given the amount of ad hoc support that we've seen come into the sector, and given the late season rally we've seen in crop prices, USDA now has net farm income at $120 billion. That's up 43% from last year. And it would be the second highest of all time. I've been telling folks that's a little bit of a false positive because cash receipts from crop and livestock sales were actually down $3 billion, and the lowest since 2016. The reason why net farm income is up so much is the amount of government support that we've seen come into the sector. Again, it was up 107% from last year. We also saw a small haircut in production expenses. They came in at $344 billion. That's down $5 billion from last year. And I think overall, the production expenses are the lowest they've been since 2012. But just to put this into perspective, when you take net farm income, which is a pretty broad measure of farm profitability, 120 billion, the second highest all time, but nearly 50 billion of that was government payments. Moving into 2021, I don't think we're going to see that much ad hoc support, if any at all, come to the sector. So, that's why it's so important that these higher commodity prices that we see today, on the crop side at least, continue. On the dairy side, we'd welcome to see some higher milk prices there, but I think we're looking at least last time I looked, class 3 and 4 were somewhere in the neighborhood of 15, 16 bucks per hundredweight, which is far below where it was, earlier this year on the back of the food box program. If we take CFAP 1 and 2 and we take MFP 1 and 2, we've seen more than 40 billion in ad hoc support come into the agriculture sector over the last few years. That doesn't even include PPP. It doesn't include WIP. It doesn't include WIP Plus. It doesn't include your top up on Prevent Plant. It doesn't include crop insurance. It doesn't include Farm Bill. This is just ad hoc support to producers. So there in Iowa, about $4.5 billion has flowed in to the state to help offset financial losses related to trade and or COVID-19. So this is going to be something that, there's going to be an adjustment period moving forward. We've seen President-elect Biden, make several statements on China in terms of wanting to review the Phase 1 agreement. We're going to keep the tariffs on China, but I'm just not entirely sure that this next administration will make the type of ad hoc payments that our current administration has done. We often say we want to farm for the market. We don't want to farm for a government payment. And I think that's where we're headed in 2021. And just putting the magnitude, the ad hoc payments that we've received in 2020, again, it's $46.5 billion. In 2019, it was over $20 billion in direct payments. in a normal year, we're looking at about 10 to 12 billion dollars in either conservation payments, CSP, EQIP, CRP, or ARC and PLC. Again, those are normally about $10 billion. So to get 46.5 billion is pretty significant. This year, as a percent of gross revenue, that's about 10%, which is the highest that we've seen, not adjusted for inflation, but the highest we've seen all time. So again, there's going to be an adjustment moving into 2021. And I think, kind of to wrap up things, and I really look forward to your all's questions. And again, you can ask questions about anything. It doesn't have to be about this anything in this presentation. I'm happy to share everything that Farm Bureau is doing. We're going to send a letter today. I don't know if any of you have received a letter from an Ask LLC attorney group asking you to repay any money that the old Dean Foods paid you before bankruptcy. But we're going to be very engaged on that. You'll see a letter from us this afternoon. More than happy to answer questions about that. But I think moving forward, the big thing that this next administration has said they want to work on, and it's no secret, it's climate. When you think about agriculture and climate, we represent less than 10% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. On the livestock side, whether it's enteric fermentation or manure management, we're at less than 4% of greenhouse gas emissions. But I think the good news is that we can be part of the solution. We're uniquely positioned in our ability to care for the water, care for the soil, care for the air. We can sequester carbon in the soils. Through forestry management, we can capture carbon. So I think there's an opportunity to turn that into an income stream. Folks are talking about it. I think Iowa several years ago was on the forefront when we were working on cap and trade. But we do have an opportunity to be part of the solution. I think what I tell all the food companies when they come talk to us on climate is that it's got to be economically sustainable. It can't be a situation where you're coming to the farmer to say, I want you to plant cover crops, but we're not going to pay you anymore. It's not free. These cover crops, whether you're aerial seeding it or something, you're looking at $20, $30 plus per acre just to get the cover crops down. Doesn't even mean that they're going to take. So you need technical support as well. These companies got to understand that they need to make it economically sustainable. This is a public good. More adoption of climate smart practices require increased investment in broadband. We need to get broadband across the country. We need to bridge the rural divide. We're working on that. But we are, President Duvall is actively communicating with folks on the transition team. We had a conversation with folks on the transition team right before Thanksgiving. We're going to be reaching out, having another one with them pretty soon. Secretary Vilsack is obviously from Iowa. He's very engaged, and I know he and President Duvall have had a number of conversations. He's visited with our State Farm Bureau presidents right before the election. So we've got a lot of lines of communication to the transition team and folks that are likely to be, in positions of power from a political standpoint for agriculture. And that's good because that gives us a seat at the table so that we can communicate the priorities of farmers and ranchers across the country and make sure that we're heard as our newly elected officials and our current elected officials consider policies as we move forward. So with that, I really do look forward to everyone's questions here. One of the other things I'll mention right before our questions is when you think about Chairman Peterson, Mike Conaway, Senator Roberts, we've lost 85 years of ag policy experience on the Hill. So it's very important for us to be engaged with folks that are going to be leading the ag committees moving forward. We saw Congressman Scott on the House Ag Committee, G.T. Thompson on the House Ag Committee have now moved into leadership positions. So we've got great relationships with those folks, but it's going to be real important for us as farmers and ranchers to continue to communicate with our elected officials, share the priorities of agriculture. Before COVID, we'd bring 5,000 to 6,000 farmers through our doors every year to do fly-ins on Capitol Hill. And, folks on the Hill don't really care to hear from me. They want to hear from you. President Duvall always talks about getting outside your fence rows. We need to do that and make sure that we're real engaged with this next administration to communicate the priorities of farmers and ranchers. So with that, I really do look forward to your questions. And thank you very much for the opportunity to visit with you guys this morning.
We'll now open it up for questions. Anybody that has a question, please feel free to put it in the Q&A box or come off mute at this time and ask. But I'll kick it off. Dr. Newton, you talked a little bit yesterday when we spoke about what's going on at Dean's Foods. Would you be able to cover that a little bit more, and what efforts will American Farm Bureau be taking on that?
Right. So about 400 to 500 producers that were Dean independent producers got a letter over Thanksgiving week. Some may have gotten a letter earlier in the year that said, effectively, you sold us milk in the 90-day period prior to bankruptcy. You need to repay a portion of that. The letters, 6 or 7 page letters, opened up with telling farmers how much they owe. They were predatory letters. The fact is, and this is not legal advice, and I'll just speak freely with you guys, it's not legal advice, but we think most farmers who got one of these letters have a full defense, that they shouldn't have to pay any money. We're going to send a pretty strongly worded letter to the law firm today, indicating that again, if they don't withdraw these letters, we will take legal action. We represent all farmers and ranchers. Somebody's got to stand up and speak for these independent dairy farmers that got these letters, and I'm proud that we're going to do that. Zippy Duvall, my boss, when I told him that people were getting these letters over Thanksgiving, he was pretty upset. And so our letter's going in today. We'll share it widely. I'll send a copy to you as well. But what they did to these family farmers was wrong. They shouldn't have done it. If they would have even thought about the fact that this is an ordinary business transaction, shipping milk to the plant, they should have realized that these farmers shouldn't have got that letter in the first place. So we're going to be engaged. We're standing up for you, and I'll share that letter once we send it in today.
Thank you for that. Is there any additional questions? Feel free to come off mute and ask. Otherwise, I'll ask our associate director, are there any questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box?
Yeah, thank you, Mitch, and thank you, Dr. Newton. We do have a few questions in the chat box for you, and the first one comes from Gary Kriegel, and he says, how did we get into this situation that neighboring dairies get mailbox prices as much as $10 per hundredweight difference in a single month?
And I'll provide an answer. I see, Dr. Stevenson, longtime friend. Haven't seen him in a while, but can't wait to see him again. He can provide some color on that too. My perspective is, we had, a pretty wide gap between class 3 and class 4 milk prices, largely in part because, plants were gearing up to, buy cheese for restaurants reopening. We also had the class 1 milk price change. So you had, record depooling, negative PPDs. So if it really depends on who you were shipping your milk to and how and if they shielded you from these negative PPDs. If you were shipping milk to a cheese plant, they had higher proceeds from the cheese market that they could have paid you instead of passing along that negative PPD. But, that's effectively what's happened. And it really depends on who you ship your milk to. I've got farmers that call me quite a bit saying it's really, there's two different kind of farmers, those that had milk that went to cheese facilities and didn't have these negative PPDs. And then some guys that just went to fluid plants that not only did they get the negative PPDs, and oh, by the way, if you hedged using CME or use DRP or DMC, that didn't exactly work too well either for those negative PPDs. But then those folks that receive those negative PPDs. So it's unfortunate. I think it's going to solve itself, outside of the government coming in and doing another food box program, which again, I'm not sure if they're going to do. These prices should start to converge. The downside of that is it's not because butter and powder prices are coming up. It's because cheese prices are going down.
Right, thank you for that. And we do have another question. You somewhat touched on this a little bit. It's from Ken Berker, and he asked, what government programs will be buying dairy in 2021, if not food box?
I mean, we've got a pretty significant food purchase and distribution program at USDA already. You also have the SNAP program, so people have the cards to go buy groceries. So I think it'll be through those channels that food purchase and distribution come. The fact is, through those though, through the food box, it was very clear. Get a gallon of milk, get cheese, get pre-cooked meats, get fruits and vegetables. Under other government food distribution programs, it's more diverse. So you're not likely to see, a gallon of milk or cheese purchased in the same capacity. But the food box program was, the reason we put the food box program together in the first place is you had people with perishable products with nowhere to go. And we're not in that situation today like we were in the spring. So I think we'll see traditional food distribution programs carry the weight moving forward, and not the food box program. I know that even potential Ag Secretary Marcia Fudge has been critical of the food box program.
John, can you hear my question?
I certainly can.
Yes, just got a question. You made the comment about it's a little bit harder for us as U.S. dairy farmers to export our dairy products because we kind of put it as a tail on export because we don't have as many dry products to ship besides non-fat milk. Working with Tom Vilsack and the Export Council, is there a way, as we move forward, we're going to have that export market in order to keep our dairy industry profitable in the U.S., I think. So is there a way, do we need to try to change that, how we export our products to China or to the other countries, that we make more of our cheese products more available, or that's not a tied on situation like you explained?
Well, and when I said that, it was specifically in reference to China in particular. I think we've got a pretty good foothold, in some of our other Asian countries with some of our cheeses and butter products. On China, they had some structural barriers too. A good example of that, Ambassador Dowd and Undersecretary McKinney, when they were negotiating the phase 1 deal with China, they had the Chinese delegates in at the table. And I think one of the staffers, McKinney or Dowd, they sent their staff out to the corner store and bought a bunch of Fairlife. And they brought the Fairlife in and set it on the table. The Chinese folks drank it. They're like, this is amazing. And Ambassador Dowd tells the story better than I do, but he says, we know it's good, but you won't let us sell it to you. So there were some structural barriers in place that also prevented us. And the phase 1 deal addresses some of that so that we can get some of our products into the country. So I think things will continue to improve. China's a huge importer of dairy products. It's their second biggest import after soybeans. So there's an opportunity there. And again, I think Secretary Vilsack over at Dairy Export Council is working on it. They've got a goal to export 20% of our milk solids. And I think they're moving in the right direction.
Okay, Lee Mawson, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Lee, for the question. And Sam Schweppe, she has her hand raised here. And if you're able to, Sam, I'll have you pop off mute if you would like to ask your question.
While we're waiting to see if Sam can come off mute here, up in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a button that says Speaker View. If you hit that, it might be a little cleaner as we transition from speaker to speaker, and you can see who's talking. Jenna, I think we have one or two more questions in the Q&A. We'll switch to those, and then we'll move on to our next speaker.
Sounds great. And Sam, if you're able to come off mute, we'll come back to you, but in the sake of time, we'll keep moving here. This question comes from Ron Lent, and he says, what's going on in the carbon credit market?
That's a fantastic question. I know that there are a number of companies out there working with farmers on the carbon credit market, but on the federal level, there is a piece of legislation that Senator Stabenow and Braun have introduced that would effectively make USDA the one-stop verification process for telling you how much carbon you've captured in the soil, or how many carbon credits you have, and I think that's important. I think we're supportive of that effort, but this whole thing's getting stood up as we speak. We know where we want to go, but we've got to get the infrastructure there. We've got to scale up the ability to measure carbon captured in the soil. There are companies working on that as we speak. I think we're going to get there, but we've got some years still to work on that.
Thank you, Dr. Newton. And the next question comes from Robert Horse, and he asks, any insight on possibly changing milk price reformulation at the federal level? Can the dairy industry unite to make changes?
Well, I mean, you can propose to USDA at any point in time a request for a hearing. We adopted policy at Farm Bureau, I guess now a year ago almost, to support the ability for dairy farmers to vote on federal milk marketing order changes. We're continue to work on that. But let me talk a little bit about the difficulty of trying to go to a federal order hearing. You have to demonstrate what the disorderly market conditions are. So you probably need an economist to help you. B, it's a legal process. So you probably need a lawyer to help you. C, through the comment period, you got to weigh in there. So you probably need a lobbyist to help you. It's a cumbersome process. We're here to help. At any point in time, people can propose a change to the federal orders. And we look forward to working with independent farmers and ranchers across the country to help make sure that their voices are heard during an effort to reform federal orders. So it can happen. Farmers can propose a change at any point in time. Doesn't mean USDA will go to a hearing, but you really can do it at any point in time.
And Sam, if you're able to hop off mute, I see your hand is still raised. I will allow you the opportunity to ask your question. And I see your hand raising just disappeared, so no worries at all. If there's anyone else on the line that would like to unmute, I'll give you a couple seconds here to ask your questions. I see Mary has her hand raised. Mary, would you like to ask your question over the internet, or would you like to chat into the Q&A? Feel free to unmute.
I was just wondering how imports are going to affect our dairy prices in the future.
That's a great question, Mary. I don't have the latest numbers on where dairy imports are. I suppose that Dr. Stevenson probably has that information. I know he's going to speak to you guys. How are they going to affect us? We support access overseas. So that means we've got our doors open too. I don't think that we import a significant amount of dairy products. There are times when our prices are higher than world prices, and that creates the incentive to bring in product. A number of years ago, when I worked for National Milk, butter prices were really high, and we were looking at data showing folks importing anhydrous milk fat because it was cheaper to import that from New Zealand than pay U.S. butter prices. So I think imports are always going to be part of the story. We have open access for a lot of our agricultural products that come into the United States. We import quite a bit, actually, in terms of agriculture. Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $130 billion a year. A lot of that from our North American partners. But we are big importers of agricultural products as well as big exporters.
Thank you for your question, Mary. And we do have one last question for you, Dr. Newton. And this comes from Dennis Mashik. And he says, will the PPD ever be taken out completely?
The PPD is a function of the way component pricing works. And so in the federal order pool, the first thing that really comes out is the protein money. And that's what, you got to pay the protein price, the butterfat price, the other solids price, out of the pool. And when that exceeds the class 1 value of milk, you end up with a negative PPD. That's just the way the accounting of these pools work. You could change it so that you mask the impact of depooling and negative PPDs. I think in the California order, and again, Mark can correct me if I'm wrong, there was an initial proposal to lower the component values if the PPD was negative, so that there was never on the milk check a negative PPD, but rather a lower butterfat, protein, or solids price. In the skim fat orders, they don't have negative PPDs, but they're still subject to the same basic principles of pricing and valuing milk. So the only way to really get rid of negative PPDs is, to go to some other type of milk pricing system that doesn't have the same mechanics as the current one. You could go to a competitive pricing system. You could go to a system where there's no minimum price and you just pool differentials. People have a lot of different ideas on how you change federal orders. I think the challenge is, people have figured out how to make them work, and they just want to tweak it. They don't want to make very significant changes to the order system. And if we did, it would be, disruptive. If all of a sudden you woke up tomorrow and it was a free market for milk and dairy products, people would spend some time trying to figure out how to price milk, and there'd be a lot of disruption. So that's probably not the answer you were looking for, but I don't know what else to tell you.
Well, with that, thank you, Dr. Newton, for all of your insight today. It's been fabulous to learn about what's going on here in 2020 and what we can look forward to in 2021. If there's any additional questions that come up, please feel free to put those in the Q&A box, and we will make sure that we get those to Dr. Newton.